Actually, I've turned my eye to politics.
Okay.
Yeah.
Book yourself in for Christmas 2029. That's when they say the ferries will be in action by then.
There needs to be a lot more care taken in how these decisions are made going forward.
We are tracking down, things are slowly getting better, but we're still quite a way away from other countries that we would usually compare ourselves to.
Welcome to the Weekly Wrap, where we go over the top video stories from the past week. First up, a casual tweet from Canadian tech investor Andrew Wilkinson led to Tiny's $175 million acquisition of New Zealand DJ software company Serato. Co-editor Hamish McNichol with this exclusive NBR interview.
So, we've sold 2/3 of the business to a Canadian company that buys businesses.
How does that feel?
Feels pretty good.
Yeah.
It's been a long time, as you know.
Yeah. So a little bit more background to this deal with Tiny, the Canadian listed company that's bought you guys. How long have you been in talks with them? How did you guys meet?
Well, how we met was a friend of mine forwarded me a tweet from their founder that said, basically, I love New Zealand. I've just come back from there. Any great businesses in New Zealand? And this was right in the middle of the ComCom debacle. So we weren't able to pursue them at the time, but I kept it in the back of my mind. And then when it got announced that our original deal was blocked, we sent the founder an email, and they were instantly interested. It turns out Andrew Wilkinson, who's the founder, had a bit of interest in DJ anyway, and so did the CEO and the deal guy that we've been speaking to. So it's been pretty favourably received by Tiny. Did you have other suitors come out of the woods as well post ComCom? We did, and we also had pre-existing suitors who were from before the announcement, and there were a lot of options. But Tiny was unique. They are the sort of company that buys and then they hold forever. Right. And we weren't really excited about selling any of Serato to a company that was going to then turn around and sell it again 5 years later, because,
It's not what we believe in.
Yeah. Okay. So the release from Tiny and from yourselves talks a lot about this aligned vision for Serato and what's next. Can you just go in a little bit more about what the future plans might be for the business?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we've been doing a lot of research and entry into the production field. So we've just recently released a plugin for people to make music as opposed to playing it on the DJ side. So we're diversifying mostly into that realm, and we're lots of other research that we can't talk about in the actual DJ side of things. And
but, adjacent markets.
Yeah.
Sure. And how has business been more broadly for the last 12 to 24 months as well?
Amazing.
Stellar. Yeah.
You can tell from the
valuation.
And the valuation.
Yeah.
The original deal was for $65 million US.
Yep. And
the current one is upfront $100 million. So that's purely a reflection of how well the team's been doing under the pressure of having to deal with the ComCom as well as business as usual.
How have you managed to keep staff engaged during that process? It's obviously a pretty disruptive period.
I think there's been a bit of a separation. So we've got a few key team members on the exec who've been working with the deal, and the rest of the team have been urged to carry on. Don't worry about what's going on, and maybe a bit more autonomy, but less oversight from the people who've been hammered by this process. But now we get to go straight back to full on all cylinders, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, but I think all credit goes to Young, the CEO, for managing to pull that off. Yep. Managing to delegate sufficiently that the teams could do such an awesome job while he and other execs were distracted by this.
And not just distracted, let's just point out that they were doing a lot of extra hours. So, burning the candle at both ends, because you can't just completely not be there.
And remember, this came on on the tail of that year-long Commerce Commission process, which in itself was grueling.
Yep. How have they reacted to the latest news, staff?
The staff, lots of
Thrilled. Yeah.
on the meet, the Google Meet this morning. There was lots of like celebratory confetti flying around, digital confetti.
Yeah, cool. And obviously they're buying 66%. What does that mean for you both in terms of your own ownership stake that you maintain and your own position within Serato going forward as well?
So we'll both stay on the board.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm retaining a much larger stake. I'm keeping 25% of Serato.
And then the other founders are keeping the other 9%.
Right. Okay.
So Steve and the other original founders.
You'll still be actively involved though as board members, obviously?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So 25 years of building this business, the ComCom stuff over the last 24 months or so. How do you reflect on getting to this position today? I mean, how do you look back on what you've done and how you've got to this point today?
Incredibly proud.
Yeah.
And not just of what Serato has become, but the team has been, the way that the culture has been maintained and organically grown to the size that we are now, and the things that we can pull off. Yeah, just really proud of everything that we've done.
I think it's also quite humbling how the company has grown, not just under our stewardship, but subsequently with other leaders, and how the teams have performed and gone from strength to strength, and this is proof positive.
And we talked last year about how this was maybe a chilling signal for the New Zealand tech market. Is this a good signal on the flip side today?
Well, this doesn't really help other companies. We're in the fortunate position of being so strong in that we could recover from a block like that. And so that chilling message is really
Still broadly true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the involvement of ComCom on that deal just didn't seem right to us, and I don't think that now that we've sold to a party that ComCom has no interest in, I don't think that makes anyone less nervous about their prospects.
Right. Okay.
And let's not forget, it's still, it's obviously still an overseas company we're selling to, but because we weren't able to sell to an industry partner, we had to go to a version of equity, and for us to find a company that was not going to buy and then flip it 5 years later was pretty difficult.
It's not a private equity firm, right?
Exactly. And this is a really big deal for them. It's a considerable chunk of their revenue that they're buying right now. And so, in order to make the deal happen, we've actually been paid partly in tiny shares. Okay. And so we're actually coming out with a lot less cash than we would have in the other deal, but much better result for me personally, because I get to stay involved, and just a really completely different deal. And so there's the type of deal that we were trying to do previously just doesn't seem possible. So I don't think the message has changed.
And one of the pros was going to be the ability to reinvest in the local tech market, and that's now, much reduced.
Right. Okay. Why is that?
Because in order to get a deal done that kept the company in stable hands for the long term meant taking a deal where not very much of the consideration is in cash.
Right. Okay.
So it's just one of the unintended consequences maybe of the Commerce Commission action.
So what sort of stake do you both end up with in Tiny then, can you say?
If you add up the Serato founders' stake, it's around 10%.
Okay.
So it's not insignificant.
And the release mentions a few regulatory approvals sort of here clear on this deal. Is there expecting any trouble with any of those? Or?
No, ComCom are well aware of this deal, and they have not made any...
I think the regulatory approvals are more so on the Canadian side.
Right. Okay. So obviously still going to both be involved with Serato, but you sort of turn your mind to what might be next for either of you, or a holiday?
I've had to promise that I won't start any more companies. I need to focus on my kids for now.
Yeah. And you, AJ?
Yeah, well, actually, I've turned my eye to politics.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm really feel invested in the future of New Zealand, and I want to do what I can to make things a bit better for businesses and, more importantly, the less privileged in New Zealand.
So have you joined a party or anything yet? Or?
I have.
Can you share any details just yet? Or?
I'm hearing this in real time.
I've joined the board, in fact, of the Opportunities Party.
Okay. All right. Cool. Anything else either of you want to add?
Well, I mean, this is not even the end of the road, but it's certainly a great milestone in a very long journey, and it's impossible to name all of the people that have helped us get here, but hopefully they know who they are. You know, hundreds of people have contributed to this fantastic outcome over it's actually closer to 27 years now we've been doing this. Yeah.
To politics now, and political editor Brent Edwards discusses this week's announcement from Winston Peters about the 2 new ferries for December 2029. This week, Rail Minister Winston Peters announced the government's plan to replace the ageing Cook Strait ferries. Let's bring in our political editor Brent Edwards. So Brent, what's happening?
Well, what's happening is Cabinet's agreed on the specifications for the ferry, so roughly 200 metres long, roughly 28 metres wide, rail enabled, and then also on the infrastructure, so you'd need new port infrastructure at Picton, but in Wellington they say all they'll need to do is upgrade and modify the existing ferry terminal that's there, so trying to minimise the costs. Now they go out to kind of tender, and by the end of this year, they should then decide on the shipyard that's going to build the 2 ferries, and they also should have reached agreement around the scope of the work on the port infrastructure and how it's going to be paid for.
How different is this announcement to what was announced in December?
Well, I think the big difference is, that they're going to really look at more widely at shipyards. I think there was a sense they could be much more focused. And also the big thing, in December, there was a question mark over whether the ships would be rail enabled. In fact, I think there seemed to be a fairly clear intention from Nicola Willis and the national members of the Cabinet that they didn't want to, because they felt that would help reduce cost as well. So I think that's the big thing. Winston Peters has won out on the day in terms of ensuring that the ferries are rail enabled, so they will carry rail carriages across the strait.
How much of a victory is this for Winston Peters, do you think?
Well, I mean, clearly a victory, because of that. It was always interesting because if you go back to the December news conference when Winston Peters was announced as Rail Minister, and he and Nicola Willis kind of announced the first steps in this process. That had come after a Cabinet meeting on Mondays, and then Wednesday, MBR, we've received 2 papers, one from the Monday and then a paper that was dated on the Tuesday. And in both of those, one a Cabinet paper, one a Treasury paper, what they're talking about is both Nicola Willis, the then Transport Minister Simeon Brown, and the then SOE Minister Paul Goldsmith being the shareholders in the new company Ferry Holdings, which is doing all of this work. And then just a day later, Winston Peters is Rail Minister and now responsible for the whole thing. So he's clearly taken charge. He'll be patting himself on the back. He's always been a supporter of rail, and he's ensuring that it doesn't get relegated in this project to replace the ferries.
So will this project be cheaper?
Well, he's saying it's going to be billions cheaper. Now, just how much, we don't know, and it depends on the numbers. The IREX project had blown out to $3.1 billion, although Winston Peters says Treasury had warned it could go as high as $4 billion. So look, we already know that Kiwi Rail has written off about $468 million already from having cancelled the IREX project. There's a $300 million set aside for a break fee, whether that Mr. Peters says not all of that will be used. But then you've got to build 2 new ferries. We don't know what the cost of those will be, and we still don't know what the final costs of the infrastructure will be. But both he and Nicola Willis argue it'll be a lot less because the ferries will be smaller, so the port facilities won't have to be as big. And given now under IREX they were going to build a whole new facility in Wellington, given they'll just upgrade what's there, then they'll reduce costs as well.
When can we get on the water?
Well, book yourself in for Christmas 2029. That's when they say the ferries will be in action by then. Interesting. A lot of news coverage keeps on talking about it from 2029 on, but it's actually, according to Mr. Peters, end of 2029. So still a long, long way away. And, you wonder if things went wrong with the process, could it be later than that? I mean, but there's a lot riding on this now. It's been delayed a couple of years, by abandoning IREX. So, the government will certainly be keen to get on and ensure that they get those new ferries in place, certainly by that date.
A recent change to the Crimes Act now makes it a criminal offence for employers to intentionally withhold wages, salaries and other entitlements without reasonable excuse. Simpson Grierson partner Rachel Judge speaks with Simon Shepherd.
In Toil and Trouble this week, a seemingly minor change to the Crimes Act was passed which will impact all employers. The change creates a new criminal offence for all employers and those who aid and abet them if they intentionally withhold wages. So what are the ramifications? Well, joining me now is Rachel Judge, employment partner at Simpson Grierson. Thanks for coming in. Can you tell me, so what do employers need to know about this?
So what they need to know is essentially, it was already unlawful to withhold wages. So in some ways, not much is changing, but we now have this criminal liability element, which is quite significant because what it now means is that if an employer withholds wages and they do not have a reasonable excuse for doing so, the company could be found criminally liable and any individuals who aid and abet in withholding those wages.
Right. Is this just a small range of companies, or is it just like everybody who is impacted?
So it covers all employers in New Zealand.
Right.
So everyone is impacted, and what it means is that employers need to take a lot more care when they are paying wages, and particularly when they're making deductions from wages, offsetting, things like that are the more grey area where people now have to be a lot more careful.
Right, so when you say offsetting, what do you mean by that? It's just like withholding some payment for some funds that are owed to the company, or?
Yes, that sort of scenario, and taking it to the more extreme, what we sometimes see is an employee may have misappropriated money from their employer. They might have taken $50,000, let's say. If they're owed $5,000 by the employer, an employer may think, well, we'll offset that against the debt you owe us and we won't pay you.
Right.
Now, if they were to do that, there is a real risk that they would be found criminally liable.
Right. Okay. And if they're found criminally liable, I mean, criminal charges have penalties. What are they?
So if convicted, employers who are individuals could be liable for up to a year in prison or a $5,000 fine, and all other employers could be liable for a fine of up to $30,000.
Right. Are these quite stringent penalties when you look at other employment law?
Definitely. In employment law, it's generally it's a civil jurisdiction. So there's penalties, but you're going through the civil jurisdiction. You're not looking at criminal liability. So that is what makes this so much more significant.
Right, you end up with a criminal prosecution and a criminal record.
That's right. And so it could be the company that faces that, but more significantly for many people, it can be those individuals within the company making decisions who could now be found criminally liable, which, is something we don't really see in the employment space.
Right, okay. So what is the worst that could happen? Say, if is that the worst that could happen? You know, if a company's found criminally liable or an individual, or could it get any worse than that?
Well, that is really the worst case scenario,
Yeah.
that the company's found criminally liable or an individual who has aided and abetted that decision making.
Okay.
So that could be someone in payroll or a manager who is having that final say about what is paid to someone.
Okay. So companies are going to have to look at this and think, well, how am I going to be compliant and not run foul of this new law? What should they do to prepare?
So I think the key thing is awareness. So making sure that payroll managers and any other manager or director within a company who's making decisions about payments, that they're aware of this new liability, and then having that care when they are making payments now, and particularly when they're considering deductions. Because in my experience, most ordinary employers are not just withholding wages. People are generally paying their employees. But where I see a lot of companies potentially getting unstuck is if they're making deduction decisions that end up now having that criminal liability. So I think people need to be aware of it. Companies need to look at training for their relevant personnel, and there needs to be a lot more care taken in how these decisions are made going forward.
Finally this week, Workplace Relations and Safety Minister Brooke Van Velden has highlighted the need for clearer legislation to distinguish the health and safety responsibilities of management in the hope of addressing concerns of over-compliance. Brent Edwards has more.
Workplace Relations and Safety Minister Brooke Van Velden, you're revamping health and safety laws. Why?
We're doing it because over the last few years, the ACT Party in particular has heard from a range of small business and large business that they don't know what they need to do to comply with health and safety law, and the cost of health and safety law is creeping up and up and up, but they're not sure if they're actually getting any value for it or it's actually reducing harm. So last year, as part of the coalition agreement, I went out on a roadshow to make sure I was truly getting the sense of the community and not just hearing from one side of it. So we went from Whangarei to Bluff, talking to as many people as possible from as wide a range of industries as we could find. You know, we had forestry, agriculture, manufacturing, tradies from the building and construction sector, small retail, some large companies. We met with people like the Institute of Directors, and people who are actively involved in health and safety management in their own companies as well. And it really did confirm that there was a need for change. This wasn't just one silo, it was across the board. The costs are too high, the confusion is too large, and people are really wanting clarity.
I guess, irrespective of what the regulation is, shouldn't it be clear to a business what steps they need to take to keep their workers safe?
Well, it's not, because it's not defined anywhere in the law.
But just for the business themselves, they know their business, irrespective of what the law, and because we've got this terrible safety record, right? It hasn't got any better.
Well, actually, some of the WorkSafe data coming through suggests that we are tracking down. Things are slowly getting better, but we're still quite a way away from other countries that we would usually compare ourselves to. And so it begs the question, why is it that companies are spending so much money and time on health and safety, but we're not seeing the improvements that you would expect under a regime that's similar to what Australia and the UK have? And so what we've found, going and speaking to a lot of these small businesses, is that they're spending a lot of their time on compliance that is trying to minimise all risk all the time at any cost. So you've got people who've literally got posters up saying, warning, this is a hot water tap, warning, there's a step here. And you've got posters everywhere, but it's not there to reduce those critical risks. And it's those critical risks that I want us to focus on as a country, because it's those deaths and serious injuries that are going to have huge ramifications for someone's life, less so if you're hurting yourself with a stapler in an admin job in an office. And I always love going back to this example, but we went to a couple of business associations to hear real on-the-ground stories. And there was one woman who is part of the admin department at her organisation. And she said when they get to the end of the month, they all get around together and they laugh about, okay, what paperwork can we file this month for the big bosses upstairs, because they want a paper trail of what we have done to keep themselves compliant. So they laugh about, has anyone actually stapled themselves? Because we will file that. We want people focusing less on just filing paperwork so that they can show that they've been compliant with the law, and focusing on, is there actually any actions that we take in our company that can lead to death? And if so, how do we manage that risk appropriately? And are there any actions or work environment that could lead to serious injury? And how do we manage that risk? And if we focus ourselves on critical risks, that means that companies aren't sweating the small stuff, and we don't have, directors coming in from on top as well, saying, I need to know every single detail that you're doing because I'm fearful of prosecution. That fear of prosecution was permeating everywhere.
And I think the change you've announced today is a shift from regulation to businesses going by approved codes of practice. I mean, what will that mean for them?
This will, I hope, allow people to have less stress, but importantly, allow people to know what they actually need to do to comply. So this is the approved codes of practice. What we've heard from a range of industries that have technical regulations is that the regulations have not kept up with technology change or time, because it takes a lot of time and resource within government to put things into regulation. And what we're wanting to do is take away some of the government mandate and say, if you're an industry group or a sector that has a specific risk factor, as a group, you can create an approved code of practice, which means some industry and workers would get together, suggest what they think they need to do to manage their risks, take it to WorkSafe, take it to the minister. If it's signed off as acceptable and actually having benefits that outweigh the costs, that means anybody who follows that particular manual will be compliant. That will be a lot of weight off people's shoulders, knowing, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing too much? Am I not doing enough? And I think this will lead to people knowing what they need to do, but also not trying to over-comply. And we're seeing a lot of money sucked away in our economy from over-compliance as well. So
legislation you expect it to be law sometime next year. Will you then have a review period to, 3-4 years down the track, see, is it making a difference? Not just in terms of cost, but is it making a difference to the actually rate of serious injury?
Yeah, well, I would expect that there'd be a review provision. It's pretty common in a lot of our newer laws to have a review provision. But health and safety changes will actually take quite a long time to bed in. If you think of where we're going with it, there will be some legislative change. Then there will also then be the reliance on industry to step up to the table and do what they have been telling us on the roadshow, that they actually want industry-led solutions, not government specifications that become outdated. So if everybody can come to the table and create these new approved codes of practice while we also get the legislation going, that will give us the momentum to actually see some real change.
Well, how confident are you of that? Because in effect, some of these regulations and the law changes that have came in because previously employers hadn't been doing a great job at keeping their workers safe.
I do feel confident that we will see this change occur and permeate through our society. For one, because people have been telling us that the law does need change and we're reacting to this. But secondly, the main concern coming out was the lack of clarity, of not knowing what you actually need to do to comply with the law. When we have these approved codes of practice, that won't be mandatory. They'll be just a simple guide, really, that people can follow. That means that there is an ability to follow this guide, have no sweat, know what you need to do, and you will be deemed compliant under the law. Having industry step up to the table in this way will actually give a lot of power back to industry groups. They know what they need to do far better than I do, or far better than anyone else in government needs to do, and we need to respect that. And so I think people will come to the table.
But again, it does come back. I mean, it's Federated Farmers as a group that's supported these changes. But we know farming's got a terrible safety record. Has had one before these laws that we're talking about were in place, and has continued to have a poor record. So again, how do you get change in those sectors?
Well, it's actually extremely multifaceted. I'm not even sure we'd have time to discuss just even the agricultural area. One thing that we have heard is that it is very, very difficult if you're one of these small business owners, and most farms are. They're not 300 people operations or a big accounting company. They are, in many cases, mum and dad owner-operators. And they might be also trying to figure out how to comply with the Holidays Act, for example, which is another thing that I'm trying to fix. But they've got so much red tape and rules and regulation that my goal really is to find one part of their life, which is health and safety, let them know what they need to do to comply. Importantly, focus on the critical risks and don't sweat the small stuff. And that is one area of life that we can open up to make less challenging for a small business owner from across every industry group. But I'll give you one other example that's coming through our correspondence, and it's things like forklift operating. There are regulations around this that are quite outdated according to people involved in forklift operating. And one area they could update across sectors is the rules for forklifting. And that would mean that for anybody involved in that particular part of an operation, they would know what they need to do to feel compliant under the law, and then that's all they'd need to do. They can sleep easy at night.
Is this driven mainly by the issue of reducing costs or about increasing safety?
It is about increasing safety. I do care about the workers getting home at the end of each and every day. But what I've also heard is that while that is the goal, and that's the goal of most business owners that I've spoken to, they don't actually want to hurt their workers. They still don't know what they're actually supposed to be doing to do that. And I think that's where you get this muddle of doing too much but not focusing on the efforts that will truly reduce harm. And so this comes down to some of these changes that we've got, refocusing the entire health and safety at work system. So the primary purpose is to focus on critical risk, but then ensuring that for those small business owners, they know that they need to only focus on critical risk and basic workplace facilities. We know that there's far too much money going into, for example, the health and safety consultants. And look, I have met quite a few health and safety consultants on the roadshow, and I have respect for them as people. I think they're trying to do well for themselves and for their families. But we've also got to acknowledge that it's a huge burden on companies. And I've heard too many stories of small business owners bringing in a consultant, getting some paperwork and filing done for it so that they feel like they don't need to have a legal liability, and then it ends up on a bookshelf. No one's actually reading these big documents. And I want people focusing on what are the things that they see in front of them, the critical risks, the things that will actually cause harm, rather than on paperwork compliance.
And thanks again for joining us. Our news team is back from 5 a.m. tomorrow with the latest business news you can use on mbr.co.nz. See you next week.